Hey there, my name is Alex, I am the Silvermont, and let's talk about Dark Souls on the Nintendo Switch. Disclaimer time, I was given a Switch and a download code for the game, courtesy of Nintendo and Bandai Namco. So a big thanks to them for that, but moving on, well, let's talk about it. I'm going to frame this video from the context of someone who has played Dark Souls before, and has an understanding of what the game entails. But if you have no idea what Dark Souls is, and are wondering if you should get it for the Switch, the answer is almost certainly yes. Dark Souls is an action-adventure RPG in a semi-open world. The atmosphere is oppressive and thick, but with just enough beauty peeking out through the fog to keep you intrigued and enchanted by what mysteries the world has to offer. And Dark Souls has an amazing game world. Even now, as we're approaching a decade since the original release, it's one of the reasons I do compare it with Zelda. Dark Souls was the first game I played since Majora's Mask to instill a similar sense of wonder in me. But like I said, we'll talk more about this from the angle of someone who knows what Dark Souls is and is wondering a very simple question: should I pick it up on the Switch? Well, let's cover the positives and the negatives about the Switch version, shall we? Starting with the positives. Despite being called Dark Souls Remastered, this is a lot closer to the original 360 and PS3 release visually. The primary difference in graphics in the PS4 remaster, for example, would be the new shaders, tweaked lighting and particle effects. Whilst I enjoyed some of these, namely the improved particle effects, I wasn't a fan of the other things, as I thought they either stood out in a bad way or looked downright worse than the original, such as the armor shaders seemingly making the armor lose detail and reflective qualities. The Switch version is almost identical to the original Dark Souls in terms of visuals, which I personally prefer. Don't get me wrong, I'm not against the idea of visual updates, I just felt the PS4 remaster didn't do enough, and some of the updates made the game look worse. But a lot of this comes down to personal taste and preference. For example, the recent Shadow of the Colossus remake, I feel that in almost every area that is an improvement upon the original. However, some people feel that it loses a lot of the atmosphere and the feeling of the original. But what you're getting here on Switch is effectively a straight up visual port of the original game, and that's a plus in my books as they are keeping it authentic and genuine. And that leads on to my next point, performance. The original Dark Souls ran at a resolution that could very generously be described as 720p, but in truth it was below even that, at more like at a resolution closer to, off the top of my head, 1020 by 540, something like that. And the frame rate was appalling. So how about on Switch? Good news is, the game runs at 1080p and I believe 720p on the portable handheld version. So even in portable, you're getting a resolution bump. And that's relatively important for Dark Souls because a lot of the textures and models are very highly detailed, but at a low resolution you can't make out that detail as it's all blurry. A great example here would be if you compare the details of the Great Axe on 360 or PS3 versus PC with DS-Fix or on the Switch, it's a huge difference. Then we have the performance. Dark Souls on Switch targets 30 FPS and seems to maintain it near perfectly from what I can see. You'll no longer get frame drops in Blighttown and be playing through that area like 10 frames per second. So far so good then. We've got the original Dark Souls experience but at a higher resolution and a stable frame rate. We've also got the 6-player online and password matchmaking from the remaster, which I'd love to tell you more about, but I don't have the Switch's online service so I can't review what's going on there. But I can tell you that across all versions, Dark Souls has pretty wonky netcode, so I'd expect PvP to be dodgy and about on par with all the other versions of the game. But having the matchmaking via passwords is a very nice touch. As for the 6-player online, I suppose having more is better, but it's not something I personally am thrilled about. Aside from those technical aspects, I think one of the best things about Dark Souls on Switch would be the portable side of things. It's really weird and interesting to me being able to play this on a handheld device. It would make plane journeys, for example, a lot more tolerable. Whilst the controllers definitely seem to take some getting used to, it's probably better for people who have owned a Switch for a while. This was my first time ever touching a Switch, and Dark Souls is very heavy by default on the shoulder buttons, like the triggers, which didn't feel great on the Joy-Cons, but it's workable. If you're playing on the TV, I'd suggest using a different controller with better trigger buttons. But one nice thing is, you can remap the buttons in this version, which is, if for nothing else, great for remapping jump to the left stick. So by and large, this is the Dark Souls you know and love, or the Dark Souls you know and hate. But now, let's touch on the negatives. Fortunately, there's not too many. First up, whilst the game does run at 30 FPS, it's no 60 FPS. That's the big advantage the other remaster on other platforms has, 60 FPS performance. Still, as nice as it is, I do believe that Dark Souls 1 is fine for 30 FPS, as it's one of the slower, less timing oriented of the games. So it comes down to the authentic original Dark Souls at 30 FPS, or the remaster with its hit and miss visual updates at 60 FPS. Or you can play the original on Steam at 60 FPS and get the best of both worlds, granted with some horrible optimization, and I don't think you can actually buy the original anymore, but if you happen to still have it, there you go. Next up, in order to give us a stable 30 FPS, they've had to make cuts to the particle effects in the Switch version. In other words, things like fire look absolutely awful in this version, considerably worse than even the 360 and PS3 version. In a nutshell, one of the reasons the game had such bad frame rate in the original release was because of these effects. So in order to make the game run better, they've lowered the resolution on fire effects, and, well, put simply, it looks like something from 1998. In handheld mode, you won't really notice it, as it moves quite quickly and you're not really going to be staring at it. But on the TV version, yeah, it stands out and it looks comically ugly and low res and bad. Then we've got the audio. I'm not sure if it comes down to compression and lowering the bitrate of samples, but the audio in the Switch version is worse than even the original version. This isn't something incredibly obvious, but if you are someone who notices the difference between 128 kbps and 256, you'll notice this. Now personally, I only notice it because of the hours and hours of audio editing I've done since starting YouTube. But it's a baffling decision. It took a bit for me to get used to it, and unlike the lower resolution on the Fire, for example, I don't understand the purpose behind it. Is it to save on install size? Because even the original version of Dark Souls was quite a small game, and this is not too far off. Finally, this is a more subjective issue, but I feel like the game could have included the scaling options from the other version, the other remaster, the PS4 one, because when playing in handheld mode, maybe I'm just holding it too far away, but the game's UI and subtitles become rather small when playing in handheld, and it was a bit hard for me to read text unless I, started moving closer. Now granted, I know just about every line of text and every subtitle in this game by heart at this point, sadly, so it's not really a big problem, but if I were playing it for the first time, I would appreciate having larger text in handheld mode. But is it worth it? If you've never played Dark Souls, this is a great way to experience it. If you have played it, well then consider your options. Do you want a portable version? Here it is. Do you want to play the very vanilla version of the game, but with improved frame rate and resolution, without the strange new visuals of the remaster, the other remaster, because this is also called remastered. It's not confusing at all. There you go. In terms of being a definitive version though, I'm not sure. There's no new content or any particularly compelling reason to get it beyond those. The file size is around 3 GB, incidentally, and the novelty of portable Dark Souls is nice. Hopefully the whole franchise makes an appearance on Switch, because whilst I would argue the first game is the best, they're all worth playing though. Dark Souls 2, Dark Souls 3, I doubt Bloodborne's ever going to make an appearance, but that's definitely worth playing too. Same with Demon Souls, probably won't ever appear on Switch, but if you get the chance, definitely try it out. Of course, if you have any questions I didn't answer here in this video, ask them down below, and I'll get back to you ASAP. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you next week. Oh, and on a final note, I played mostly using handheld mode, apart from when I was recording the footage for this video, which I played in TV mode, as that was the only way I could figure out how to use my capture card. Thanks again, and you have a great day now. Ciao.